Welcome. I'm Susan Noyes, the founder of Make It Better Media Group, and I'm delighted to have you join us for our conversation with Matthew Pietrafetta and Emma Noyes on academic testing. And the Matthew is the founder and CEO of Academic Approach, a Chicago-based test preparation company. After earning his PhD in English from Columbia University, Matthew and his wife Lauren moved to Chicago in 2001 to found Academic Approach. As an aside, I love that he moved here at the request of Jamie Dimon, who also had 3 daughters, and he had moved to Chicago on his climb to the top of JP Morgan and asked Matthew to move to Chicago in order to continue the good work he had been doing with Jamie's daughters. For the past 22 years, Academic Approach has worked with families and schools to help raise thousands of students' scores, skills, and college readiness. A resident of Wilmette and father of 3 with very diverse learning needs, ages 18, 14, and 4, Matthew knows firsthand the responsibility parents feel in helping their students navigate their education while growing skills, gaining confidence, and experiencing success. As a parent and as a professional, he appreciates how important effective teachers, mentors, and coaches can be in each student's success story. As a parent of 6 with very diverse learning styles, I was grateful to find my way to Academic Approach as a parent. It made a great difference for many of my children, but the success story of my youngest child, Emma Noyes, who is joining us today, is the one that Matthew will use as an example. From the age of 4, Emma said, "I'm going to be an author." And when COVID hit, after graduating from Harvard University and had started with a big corporate job in the communications field, COVID hit, and she realized that did not feel like meaningful work when she was doing it remotely. And she finally leaned into the opportunity to pursue that dream. So she is now the author of the Sunken City Trilogy, a collection of young adult fantasy novels. She is also has a contract with multiple publishers to publish 2 books, one in 2023, one in 2024, in a very different space. I am delighted to introduce everyone to Matthew and Emma now. Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you.
Let's just cut to the chase and let you tell the audience about your amazing skill set with students.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Susan. And it's such a delight to be reunited with my most illustrious alum, Emma Noyes, and to be following her career now. And this is a thrilling opportunity. So thank you, Susan and Emma, for making this a possibility. And thank you, audience, for attending. 3 major topics for today. Number 1, how are students doing academically? It's been 2.5 years since we went shelter in place in Illinois and went to remote school. And there's some data that's been released recently that helps us kind of discuss and understand the impact of interrupted learning on a national level. I have some data I want to share on a local level. And so just, topic number 1, what do we have in terms of data in terms of how students are learning? Topic number 2, why do these tests matter and what skills do they reflect and why do those skills matter? And this is where I think Emma will be the ultimate representative of how building college readiness skills impact success, not just on these tests, but in the classroom, in high school, in college, and in career. So I'm so excited for her to be able to share her experience with learning, mastering these skills, and applying them in such a meaningful and creative way in her career. And then topic 3, which I want to spend the majority of our time on, is how can parents help? What information do you have? How can you use it? How can you help make personalized decisions to support the learning for your individual child? But I'll start off first with topic 1, which is how are students doing? Well, at the end of August, many of you might have seen an alarming headline in the New York Times: the pandemic erased 2 decades of progress in math and reading. Quite a sensationalist title. It did produce a lot of alarm and a lot of questions. What was it referring to? Well, it was referring to data that came back from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is one of the largest continuing and nationally representative assessments of what American students know. Now, this report related specifically to 9-year-olds. There's a forthcoming report on 13-year-olds and 17-year-olds, which I'm incredibly interested in reviewing as they get released. But the data was pretty clear. There has been evidence of the negative impact of interrupted learning on student performance. So reading dropped for the first time, largest drop since 1990 in the data, and math experienced its first drop since the 1970s when the National Assessment of Educational Progress was created. And what this detail, it's a little difficult to see, but what it shows is it tells an interesting story. At the highest percentile level, say the 90th percentile, students dropped 2 points in reading and 3 points in math. At the lower percentile levels, at the 10th percentile, the drop was more profound, 10 points in reading and 12 points in math. So what does that tell us? Well, everyone has been impacted according to this data. There's been a downward trend across all student performance. But at the lower levels of performance, perhaps where students were most vulnerable and needed more foundational skills developed, and maybe were struggling more with acquiring skills, and were struggling more with emerging skills, that they were impacted more profoundly. So this was the first time that we saw really a national study. Now, there have been bits and pieces coming out. There's been some MAP reports, the measurement of academic progress from NWEA, the Northwest Education Association. There have been things that I've been looking at over the past couple of years, but the first time that we got something national. The 13-year-old report and the 17-year-old report is forthcoming. Now, how does this square up with what we have observed in our data? I founded Academic Approach in 2001, so I've had the good fortune to work with schools and students for many years. And so I have historical data on a number of schools. We have two divisions to the work that we do. We have our school programs, where we work with schools, do large-scale testing events, professional development, classroom courses for students, and our one-on-one instruction, where we do tailored, customized programs for individual students. Schools that we've worked with for a decade, where I have year-over-year historical data on, say, how the freshmen look when they come in from all the feeder schools into the high school, the scores have been pretty stable for a number of years. And just as of this year, with the 9th graders, as we're seeing them come in, we are seeing some of the largest drops in entry-level scores that we've ever seen. And we have year-over-year history to show that with minor variations, those scores were pretty stable. So what does this tell us? That what was happening for those 7th and 8th graders before they got into 9th grade in their interrupted learning did have an impact on how that cohort is trending into high school now. It does indicate that there are perhaps some skills that are less developed than they had been for previous cohorts. What's more, in our one-on-one data, because we look at our data, every year we work with about 1,000 one-on-one students, and we compile the data and put it together and analyze trends. We have many, many years of looking at this and understanding what our averages are. And for example, to get about 5 points on average of ACT growth would take around 20 hours of instruction in years past, and about 2 practice tests, 2 to 3 practice tests. Well, we're finding now that in the current analysis of data, that to get that same growth is taking about 5 more hours of instruction and maybe about 1 or 2 more practice tests. So what is this, putting it all together, the kind of national data and the local data? It does appear that interrupted learning has had an effect. And it may be that students that we're building upon foundations that are not quite as developed as they had been in the past. So is this a cause for panic? No. But does it mean that we do start to, maybe as parents, myself with a 18-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 4-year-old, need to be looking at every bit of data that I can and trying to make sense of it and try to understand how my child is progressing? Yes, and probably with a little bit more heightened urgency than I would have maybe 2 years ago. In addition, so I will spend more time in the section on how can parents help and what can we do to dive into that.
Matthew,
but for
topic, one question, yes. I think many parents are thinking about this. You referenced raising an ACT score 20 points. is that sort of a reasonable norm or expectation for any parent who's wanting to help their child be as successful as possible?
20 points would not be, but I said 5 points in 20 hours. Thank you for clarifying that. So 5 points on average in about 20 hours of instruction. We look at those averages. How much teaching time does it take to get that kind of growth? And of course, that's an average. And if you were to start at a 32, for example, as your diagnostic score, ACT only goes to 36, so you can't even get 5 points of growth, right? But if you started at maybe at a 19, you might want more than 5 points of growth. So averages lie. You do have to dive down into the data more, but averages are also important for trending and for sort of seeing if there are large shifts year over year. And that's what we're starting to see, is that it's taking a little bit more time to teach and to practice to get the same kind of average, say if you wanted 5 points of growth, what that program looks like a little bit longer and a little bit more homework time. And I guess the question is why? And one hypothesis is that we're building on foundations of skills that maybe aren't as secure as they had been because of interrupted learning. Maybe there were some lessons that were missed, some lack of personalized learning that took place when students were remote, some academic behaviors that changed as students were at home on Zoom, as opposed to being in the classroom and being engaged with their teachers. All these various factors need to just be considered, not considered in any kind of state of panic, but just rationally considered as parents and educators. Do we have different students, a couple years into this that need a little bit something different, something more? That's what I think the data is starting to indicate at a national and a local and at an academic approach level. I think it all kind of tells a similar story. So, why do these skills matter? These are tests, and there's a variety of them. The NAEP we're talking about, not everyone takes the NAEP. It's administered everywhere, but in specific places to represent the national averages. Not everyone takes the MAP. Not everyone takes the PSAT or the ACT or the SAT. There's a lot of different tests out there. And we don't need them all for college entrance because there's test optional and so forth. So why do these skills matter? Well, I've always followed the philosophy of what we call teaching beyond the test at Academic Approach. As a graduate student at Columbia, when I first started teaching, I was teaching in the core curriculum, freshman at Columbia in New York City, classes called Literature and Humanities and Logic, Rhetoric, and Grammar, while I was tutoring high school students for the ACT and SAT in New York City. And I saw that the skills that the tests were assessing, ACT and SAT for high school students, critical reading skills, the ability to annotate a text, grasp its main idea, draw evidence-based conclusions, use master rules of grammar like sentence construction, punctuation, commas, semicolons, colons, logical transitions, and so forth, to edit your papers, mathematical reasoning, creative reasoning, science reasoning, being able to interpret data and draw evidence-based conclusions. All these skills that were assessed on SAT and ACT were directly impactful on performance freshman year in college, and were part of the curriculum that I was in fact teaching college freshmen at Columbia. And I remember asking some of the curriculum designers, why do we teach these core classes to freshmen at Columbia? And they said, well, because we want to make sure that they've mastered a core curriculum of skills before they go on into advanced curriculum so they can be successful. And so I, started coming up with the idea of academic approach. Then let's take an academic approach to the test. Let's teach skills that transfer beyond the test into the classroom and into career. And so there are a lot of valuable skills. So why look at these tests? Because the skills that they are measuring are not only impactful for performance on that test, but they are impactful for performance in the classroom, for being successful with reading, reasoning, and writing throughout high school, college, and career. And as I mentioned earlier, there is no more illustrious alum to speak to some of the practical connections that can be made between these academic skills and college and career than Emma Noyes.
Hey, thank you for the introduction, Matthew. That was so nice. I'm an alum of Academic Approach, and I just want to, first of all, just echo what Matthew said about how the skills for testing really do transfer both into college and career. I can say right off the bat, when I was a freshman, everyone has to take, at least at Harvard, everyone had to take introductory writing, and coming in with a good baseline of just grammar, punctuation, like knowing how to clearly express an argument was huge for me, just having that good baseline. And a liberal arts degree in particular is all about learning how to think, how to reason, how to argue. All of that was transferable to my education. And now as a writer, I mean, obviously, grammar and punctuation is very important. Myself, I started as, I'm transitioning more traditional publishing, but I started as an indie author, and in the indie publishing space, it's really big. There are lots of indie writers. Obviously, anyone can publish. And you would be shocked at just the levels of different manuscripts, like grammar, basic punctuation, and just having all of that really gives you a baseline of being taken seriously, being process just more professional, and it's really useful. Like I can't speak highly enough of that. In terms of creative thinking and reasoning, obviously when you're doing a story, you want the story to take twists and turns, you want it to follow to a logical conclusion. You need to sort of have that sort of logical thinking in terms of that. It helps a lot with, you'll hear authors talk about world building, which is when you're kind of creating a universe that everyone can follow along. It has to follow certain rules. And all that has to be done, told clear and engaging way the audience can follow. So I don't know enough about what I learned for these tests, how that really is to what I do now. Yeah.
And as a parent, I don't remember exactly what the jump was, but it wasn't 20 ACT points, but it was a spectacular jump. And I know that Emma, might have started off with, really, Mom, do I have to go do this? And, by the end of the process, it's like, I can hardly wait to go be with Matthew again.
We did have fun. We did have fun in our sessions.
And it's interesting. It can seem like this data is depersonalized. It's all quantitative, but there's a qualitative aspect to it too that Emma's referring to, and that we enjoyed in a student-teacher relationship to make it meaningful, to make it relevant, to make it contextualize it. And I think that's one of the challenges that parents have with this data. Number one, understanding what story it tells. And then in any kind of way, building any kind of purpose for your child about why the data matters. And is there a larger purpose to it? That you ought to maybe be curious about this, or you ought to maybe work a little bit harder, or you ought to maybe meet with the teacher and ask some extra questions about that because it could lead to A, B, and C. And I think that's difficult work to do, to build purpose and build context. As a parent, when you don't understand some of the stuff that's coming back, and you could miss it in the mail, and but there's a lot of, maybe this is where we move into the, what parents can do. There's, I think, first of all, trying to gather the feedback from all the results that are out there right now. In our district, in District 39, for example, there's multiple years of map data that is recorded. And so you can look at trends, and we just got that back recently. How's my child trending over this multi-year progression? PSATs, students are taking PSATs in 10th and 11th grade tomorrow. Those scores come back in December. There's a bunch of data out there. Are you logging into Schoology, Google Classroom, PowerSchool, whatever student information system your school has, and poking around, because all the scores tend to be reported and digitally accessible, but sometimes we forget what our passwords are as parents and we're not looking. So just information gathering first. I think just try to take some time to gather together the data from the past couple of years and see if it tells a story. It could tell a story of expected progression, and we like the upward linear slope that we're seeing. It could tell a story of volatility. Some things are up, some things are down. It could tell a story of descent, but there's a meaning to that. But just first of all, get the data. And then I think two more things that are important for parents to consider. Communication with teachers. We're having parent-teacher nights and curriculum nights. Attend those, more fervently than ever, perhaps. Ask more questions than ever to try to understand how others are observing your child's performance and academic behaviors. And then in terms of academic behaviors, the last point, observe carefully at home, what are the academic behaviors? When does your student do homework? Save it to the end of the night, do it when they get home, when they're available. Are they pacing out their assignments, or they're constantly anxious about assignments piling up and so forth? Do they meet with teachers during office hours? Do they email their teachers? Do they have the opportunity to do test corrections for extra credit, and are they doing that? So what are their behaviors? I notice as a parent and as an educator that academic behaviors, the kind of executive functioning, organizing, planning, the kind of resilience, self-advocacy skills they're not measured in standardized tests, but they directly impact performance on standardized tests. Those soft skills, social emotional learning, non-cognitive factors, whatever educators have called them over the years, they're incredibly important for success on and beyond the test. Have they changed? During remote learning, it was very easy to kind of throw on your hoodie and kick back in your chair, maybe even have your Chromebook, your iPad in bed with you while you're in class. That's not exactly the most attentive way, to engage in the classroom. How are those habits changing? Are those habits strong? And how can you begin to have conversations with your child around bringing those good habits back or developing those habits if in any way they were impacted negatively? So I think, gather data, communicate with teachers, learn as much as you can from them, and then observe academic behaviors and try to have conversations and be supportive around those behaviors. And I think that's really important. The practical things that parents can do
I
today.
see two good questions coming in. The first is, parents know that they need to be their child advocate. That is, their number one as a parent. But it is a fine line between being an appropriate advocate and being confrontational, which then causes teachers or administrators to shut down. Do you have advice on how to be the best possible advocate? First question.
Yes, I think that always proceed from a standpoint of empathy, without accusation. Be curious, ask questions, focus on the student agency. So you're not telling the student what to do, but you're asking them what they should do. So they own it. Ownership is so important in really taking true accountability of learning. I'll be honest, for 25 years, I'm being a mediator between parent and child. I often joke, like, I'm not the teacher, so I can't give you an F, and I'm not your parent, so I can't ground you. But I'm an adult that's kind of safe audience for you, that you can ask questions and be vulnerable to me, and I'm not going to judge you. I'm here to support you. So look for that's a role that I love performing and that Academic Approach loves performing, but it's also one that I've had to seek for my children. I have many coaches and tutors. I actually have other tutors, within the company for my children, because sometimes they don't want to hear it from dad. and so, but mediators can be coaches, can be guidance counselors at school, can be that English teacher, that math or science teacher that you love. So try to leverage a mediator, whether it's an Academic Approach mediator or it's someone else, it's a coach, it's an inspirational mentor, anywhere. And there's so many different places for students to find that mentor who's not mom or dad, and maybe not even a teacher that they're currently taking in school that they're afraid of maybe getting a bad grade from. So seek some mediation, as well as trying to do your best job as being non-judgmental and being supportive. I do think that is, as students can, if the student can be put in a position to self-reflect in a safe space, then the student can start to look at, and that's what one of the things that we can do for families, if they don't have this other data or they don't have an obvious mediator to go to, is we can perform, a practice test, any number of practice tests, complementary, do an analysis of the quantitative what do the scores say? And then meet with the family and the child and have that qualitative discussion. Well, what does this mean to you? How do you feel about this section of the test? Is there anything challenging about that? Oh, and we hear stories all the time. Well, I didn't really pay much attention a year and a half ago when I was learning geometry. That's why I'm missing all these geometry items on the test. Well, that's not surprising. That was the part of the curriculum that got the most diluted during maybe the part of remote learning. And that now is 20% of this test that you're taking now a couple years later. Well, of course you didn't master it. So there's a story to be told there, and the student knows it, but they need to kind of be put in a safe place to be able to have some conversations about that, look at the data, and make sense of how they experienced the past couple years, tell their story, and then tell their story of what they're going to do about it and own that story. And if they're in charge of it, they'll be more empowered, they'll be self-advocates, and they'll just invest a lot more.
So I'd love to reverse the question and ask Emma, from the student perspective, who's feeling the pressure of, my parents care a lot. I may or may not have a good relationship with the teacher or teachers of the subjects. And there's the opportunity to work with a mediator or a third party. First of all, talk about the pressures that students feel, and then the advantages of having a third party mediator, please.
Absolutely. So I was as I'm sure, because you are my mother, you will remember, I was a very specific kind of student, which was very self-motivated, maybe to the point of like a little bit unhealthy, like a little bit pushing myself too hard, putting too much pressure on myself. So it wasn't, I did feel pressure from outside, from teachers and from, outside. Oh, I'm sure my parents want me to get into a good college. I'm sure whatever. But a lot of it was internal. And I'm sure that parents or students who are watching right now can relate to that. Many of them will understand what it's like to be. It's not the outside pressure that's the problem. It's the internal pressure. And I would always just want to then advocate for as much self-compassion, if you can. Like, when I think about going to a mediator for myself, it's more of going to a mentor type figure to almost cut myself some slack. So I think I'm trying to say maybe it goes both ways when it comes to students, people who need help in one direction and the other.
It's a little bit like Matthew said with respect to teachers, approach it with empathy.
Yes, exactly.
And just a shout out to Emma. One of the reasons why she did as well as she did is that she was focused on, as her success in college and career shows, she was focused on an authentic love of the means of learning, not just the end. And so I often have said to students over the years, I've never met a student who gets a X or Y score, meaning like a really high score, like, I don't know, some 36 on the ACT or a perfect score on the SAT, because that's all they fixated on. They focused on how to learn the material, what the value of the material was, how to ask curious questions about the material, how to read and reason, and they got really good at that. Oh, and by the way, yes, they got the score that followed from it, but they became authentically interested. And I think that also is I think it's really important to focus on that, so what is the story of learning that we can get the student invested in? And when Emma and I would go over an item, the goal was to correct it. But we had really interesting conversations about what made something more evidence-based, more right or more wrong, and how to use that to assess the validity of an argument, a claim, and the evidence to support it. And in world building now, she's building the evidentiary structure underneath a vision of the whole world with a logical, coherent system. And that has nothing to do with a test score. That has to do with an authentic investment in the process of reading and reasoning. And I think that's students who do that, who can find a way to connect to the why and then own it, well, they're going to do the best. And so I think for parents too, don't be too static in looking at a number. If you start looking at all these tests and you're not loving the number, like, be more growth minded. What is the opportunity to learn that this reveals? How do we get the child invested in understanding that number tells a story of maybe a certain process of reasoning or a certain skill set or set of foundational skills they want to show up. Why? Because they'll help you feel more confident in school. You'll be able to be more creative. As Emma was saying, it's some of these skills do not allow you, if you don't have mastered them, to enter into higher levels of reading and reasoning and productivity and creativity. And so to try to find that means to the end, and Emma was always as high achieving as you were and as much pressure you put on yourself. You're an intellectual, you're authentically interested in things, you're a curious person. So you asked the right questions and therefore you learned. It wasn't because it wasn't this hard standard you held yourself to. It was the curiosity and intellectual authenticity that I think led to your success. So I think parents need to really focus on that. How do we just understand what makes our kids interested? And it may be, finding that one little niche, that weird thing. Once they get passionate about it and start to feel confident, then it transfers over to other things. And all of a sudden we see all boats rise. Their overall academic performance gets better because they got better at the first thing that interested them, the first thing they were curious about.
You just touched on really the second question I wanted to get to, which is testing to many now feels less important today because of the world of entrepreneurship. Could you, and you touched on find that first point of passion. Could you speak a little bit more about alternative ways to think about achievement and how to learn more about your children and their learning style and guide them in a great direction?
Yes, and I think that, yes, testing in the end is one little piece, right? And I'm describing it today as it can shine a light on a learning style, strengths, opportunities for growth. It maybe even lead to reinforce a story of passions. So I often talk about making the good great and the non-preferred good with students, trying to figure out their profile. It's often lopsided. It's not always evenly proficient across the board, but that's okay. It tells a story of the student. And if we see that there's a natural sort of native strength in a certain area, well, what does that lead to? What can we build on that? Emma was good at all things, but remarkably good at reading and reasoning and grammar. And so it's not entirely surprising to see the career that unfolds from that. So it's all about telling the story of the child, and testing is just a piece of that. But parents know well, and if they look at the data and say, wow, this is starting to tell the story of a whole profile of my student, and they're interested in this, then encourage the student to go talk to those teachers that could maybe do an independent study with them, or to do some supplemental learning outside and take a really interesting summer class to deepen the passion. For my son is 18 and goes to a private special ed high school because he had he was born very prematurely and had a long, complicated developmental challenges, health challenges, and a brain bleed when he was in the NICU. He was in there for 198 days before we took him home. He has a lot of learning challenges, but also has a deep passion for social justice and for utopia, for a utopian world in which we're all kind of equal and there's no discrimination. And that's part of his own story of feeling different. And so what does he write now? Well, I'm eager. I was talking to Emma before the session, and he's been doing his own writing for a few years. He has a science fiction coach in New York that I found for him, does one-on-ones with him, that he took an online class with this summer. And I asked him, would you do one-on-one sessions with my son? And he just completed a series of short stories called Working Towards Utopia. And he tells his story about his own journey, and he's creatively taking all that energy and that story and putting it into some kind of creative output. So that's his little idiosyncratic path. It fits with his story, and I'm going to lean in as much as I can to help him have the support to improve his writing. And it took many years to find what is Zach's niche. That's his niche, and everyone's got their niche. And as parents, we can listen, we can look, we can see. His reading and reasoning skills. He was hyperlexic as a kid and could decode well. So that was a strength. Math, not so much, but we support him in that. But we're taking a lopsided profile and trying to turn it into something creative and something meaningful. So That's my personal experience and my professional experience, both as a teacher and a parent.
Okay, empathy, storytelling, and social justice. That, like, I am so excited that you're developing this future citizen of the world for us. So, and I would love for you to go back to sort of pointers for parents, other things that they can do to really nurture what's best in their child and help them be more successful.
Yeah, and I know I started with a grim outlook on the pandemic's effect on interrupted learning and declines in NAEP scores and so forth. So let's move it more towards a positive and productive. What can you do as opposed to what do we lament about the past 2.5 years? I do think, number one, try to just make sure you are looking at all the data that's out there and trying to make sense of it. And that's where, if we want to bring that to us, or you have other counselors or mediators you were talking about earlier who can help you kind of look at it and tell the story of your child, it is a good point in time to start looking at some of the data and see what the past couple of years have meant for your child's learning. And then while looking at that data, try to tell the story of strengths and areas of opportunity for growth and so forth. I do think communicating with teachers right now, making sure that you're getting enough of a holistic picture of how your child is presenting in the classroom, and then observing at home, looking at those academic behaviors, and just see, first of all, just take an assessment of how is my child doing, and has there been any differences, positive, up or down, or uneven. Just get a picture of the child, and to get that data, happy to come to us, a complimentary session to discuss it, try to make sense of it. And then I think, from there to say, okay, well, what can I do if there are some gaps or deficits that have emerged? How can I support my child in filling them in? And then if there are these great strengths that we see the future of college and career, how do we make sure that doesn't lie stagnant either? Just because it's not maybe dipping or dropping doesn't mean it shouldn't be cultivated so that it can be a real great strength and can help the child be successful in college and career. So in the end, take information in and try to tell the story of where is my child now after the past couple of years of interrupted learning, and how do I help them navigate the course ahead to shore up any areas that might be a deficit and to strengthen areas of emerging skills that could really be the future of their academic success and passion.
Do you have any suggestions that are just sort of common sense for how parents can set up the home environment to be successful with respect to academic achievement and homework, but also, welcoming and nurturing and letting child know that you are there just to speak with them if they have any issues?
Yeah, I do think that a lot. I think about it personally as a parent, and I've talked to so many other parents about this as a professional and as another parent. Everything kind of let slide a little bit a couple of years ago when everyone was stuck at home. So if you didn't have your phone in the bedroom with you, in your bedroom, if you're doing your homework there, you all of a sudden were allowed to have your phone. And everything was digital anyway, and you could only communicate with your friends via text or FaceTime. So we're not going to take the phone away. That would be cruel and unusual to do such a thing. But now might be the time to start bringing back in norms around homework spaces in a concentrated space that's away from other types of media. To bring in schedules again, because they went lax and we really didn't want to stress kids out, right? That was the big, and understand the social emotional learning piece hugely, that we don't want to add extra stress or deny them access to their friends. But it may be time now to revisit that and say, okay, do we want to bring back in some other kind of norms that add structure and help students plan and execute better? Because some of those structures became lax a little bit over the past couple of years. So yeah, I do think those are good conversations to have as a family. What are the most productive norms that we want to have around here so that you have good concentrated time to work uninterrupted and you have a schedule that helps you be successful?
Great. Emma, do you have any advice from the child perspective, from the student perspective?
So this is going to sound almost bizarre, but when I started working on and growing my career in books, something that was really big in the book world is TikTok. And my mom will probably laugh at me for talking about this because I'm always on TikTok. I'm always posting videos, and it's primarily a younger generation, primarily a younger audience. But I know it's something that young people really engage with, and TikTok has brought back books in such a huge way. And I always loved reading as a kid, and I think that reading is one of the best ways to like get curious, expand your mind, all of that. And so it's such strange advice, but maybe just ask your child about book talk. Ask if they've seen anything about books on TikTok. Ask if that's something that your child does, like maybe try and relate to them in that way. I don't know. I'm not a parent. Maybe I can't give the best advice.
If it's not about books, is there an equivalent of maybe you're a future engineer and like there's a talk engineer environment?
Oh, there's everything you could possibly imagine. Science, math, whatever, the universe. It's all on there.
See, I need to hear this from Emma because I'm becoming like an old fuddy-duddy. And so I'm like, and my 13-year-old daughter who's always on TikTok, I'm like, there's some entertaining stuff there, but I haven't thought about it really as a way to engage her and ask her, what other content are you seeing? Or have you checked out this content? But I'm going to follow up with you. Emma and I have to exchange book lists, reading lists after the session anyway, some of the TikTok recommendations, because you may have given me some of the best parenting advice I've had recently.
Good.
I can make TikTok productive. I need to know how to do that. This is great.
Could I put in a request that when you exchange that list, we better also will publish that as part of our follow-up content? I'd love to see those 2 recommendations.
I love it.
Sure.
I think many parents will consume your TikTok recommendations. I never thought of making it productive, but now this is a revelation.
Like, despite what most people probably think, it is a lot of funny videos, but it's not just funny videos.
So that wasn't bizarre at all. Look, it was stimulating and helpful. Yeah. Do you have anything else you'd like to suggest?
I think just being curious, asking questions of your children. I mean, my mom read with us when we were growing up, and that was something that kind of got us going. Anything to engage with the child. I don't know. I loved reading together growing up. That was my favorite.
With popcorn.
With popcorn.
Matthew, is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience?
Keith, I think there was one extra detail just to show. Thank you very much. Yeah, just, don't panic. I think that there's been, ever since March 2020, there's been a lot of alarms sounded. And yes, the NAEP data coming back and other trending data might indicate some cause for concern, but there's no need to panic. And I think just listening to Emma today, it's uplifting. It's always a learning opportunity as a parent and as a student to be curious, to ask questions, to learn. And it's just new data to look at. Well, there may be some data that tells the story of some areas that need improvement. Well, there always is. And that's kind of the same as long as I've been working with young people for 25 years. There's always an opportunity to develop something that's a strength into something that's excellent and something that needs some support to get to a level of proficiency. That's how students learn, and that's what parents and educators do, is try to tell those stories, get the information, and make a personalized plan. So, for us, if folks are interested, we give these complimentary practice tests all the time. We do a deep skills-based analysis, code everything down to the lesson, to the skill, to the type of particular college readiness skill that they need to master, whether it's in reading, science, math, or grammar. Get that information that's sitting in your email or that got sent home by mail. Get that data, work with a mediator if you like us, to tell the story of it, and then try to just make sure that you're reacting to it in a way that personalizes the plan for your child and helps them tell their story, like Emma's great story of getting to know herself, getting to understand what she was passionate about, authentically being curious about learning, the means to the end, and then achieving so much, in college and career. Help them tell that story, but start with the data, start with some consultation, I think can be helpful, some analysis and some personalized planning.
And how refreshing to be able to say, it's a return to normal. We can start putting some of the skill sets back in, that it's, and that too is going to bring so much more hope to so many. I would like to our audience to know that Matthew participated in our virtual education summit a year ago too, and had incredible advice that along the social emotional track. And I encourage you to find that video or find those articles, because he has such great expertise to share. And thank you so very much for inviting Emma to come in and be part of this conversation too. You are always amazing, and it's been a great honor to work with you.
This has been really fun.
Thank you.
And Emma, thanks
Really
for joining
fun.
us
Really.
from Sweden.
No problem. Happy to.
All right.
And thank you for the great parenting advice, Emma.
Yeah, no.
I'll follow up on TikTok.
Well, you're supposed to thank me for great parenting advice.
Well, yes. Thank you for all that reading and popcorn. It made my job a